All right, well, we're going to continue on with our discussions on how to do some hypothesis testing, an introduction to this. And so, first off, we're going to do an example, okay, of doing some hypothesis testing here. I'll only get my marker ready to go. All right, here we go. Calcium is a vital nutrient for healthy bones and teeth. Of course it is. The National Institute of Health, NIH, recommends a calcium intake of 1,300 milligrams per day for teenagers. Nice. The NIH is concerned that teenagers are not getting enough calcium on average. Is this true? Good question. Well, state the appropriate hypothesis for performing a significance test. All right, well, it appears we're going to be doing a significance test for means. And so make sure we define our parameters. So what are we talking about here? Well, we're going to assume with our null, this is our null hypothesis. And this is what we're going to assume, okay? So we're going to assume that the mean number of milligrams or calcium intake is going to equal 1,300 milligrams, okay? And so what are we saying this is? Well, we're saying that that is the true, all right, the true consumption or true intake, there we go, intake, and that's where I'm getting this, intake of calcium milligrams per day by teenagers, okay? Teenagers. So we're going to assume that they are all doing a great job and they're drinking their milk. All right, so we're getting our calcium and we got that. Now, what we suspect, and you can see in this bottom part, is that they expect, all right, so this is where we're going to test, all right, we're going to test our alternative hypothesis because we believe that they are not getting that amount, okay? So we're saying that actually the true mean is actually lower than 1,300 milligrams, what actually they should be doing. So the true, the true mean, and we probably need to put that, eh? All right, the true mean intake of calcium in milligrams, calcium milligrams per day by teenagers. So that's what our mean we're trying to figure out. Okay, so with that, researchers decided to perform a test using hypothesis stated in number 1. Okay, so testing this hypothesis. They ask a random sample of 20 teens to record their food and drink consumption for 1 day. The researchers then compute the calcium intake for each student. Data reveals that the sample mean is 1,198 milligrams, and the sample standard deviation is 411 milligrams. Researchers perform a significance test to obtain a p-value of this right here. Okay, so we get a p-value. So explain what it would mean for the null hypothesis to be true in this setting. Well, if it's true, that would mean that teenagers, all right, are consuming or intaking 1,300 milligrams, all right, per day. Okay, that's what we would do if we were explaining if this would be true. Basically, we're saying that teenagers are consuming 1,300 milligrams per day. That's what we know because that's what we're assuming the null to be true. Now, if we get our p-value, this p-value is the probability, all right, the probability that we're going to have this or less. Okay, so essentially, we're saying that if we were to assume, okay, so first off, we're assuming the null is true, all right, is true. Assuming that the null is true, then the probability, all right, the probability of the probability of getting a sample, all right, mean of 1,198 or less milligrams, all right, is about 0.1404. That is what the p-value is. It's a probability, assuming that the null is true, okay? Assuming that, all right, that they actually are intaking 1,300 milligrams, all right? The probability of getting a sample mean of 1,198 or less milligrams is about 0.1404, okay? That's what that p-value means, okay? Now, what conclusion can we make about this at a level of significance of 0.05? Well, since, all right, since we see that 0.1404, I'll put a 0 there just so you know, is actually greater than our level of significance of 0.05, all right, then we fail to reject the null hypothesis. All right, we failed to reject the null. We failed to reject the null. Why? Because we do not have convincing evidence that teenagers daily intake of calcium does not daily intake of calcium is less than, all right, 1,300 milligrams, okay? And that's essentially what we're saying, all right? We found a p-value. We did find evidence, all right, because right here, we did find evidence because the mean was less than 1,300 milligrams. However, that evidence, because of our p-value, that p-value of getting that mean of negative or less is about there. Well, since that was greater than 0.05, that could have just happened by chance. So we fail to reject the null. Okay, we don't have enough convincing evidence. So we have evidence, but not convincing. The key word is convincing evidence that teenagers' daily intake of calcium is less than 1,300 milligrams. That's what we know. All right, we're not necessarily saying this is necessarily true. All right, not saying this is necessarily true. It's just that we didn't find evidence that would support that, at least statistically significant evidence that would support that it's false. Okay, and so for that, that is how we use, all right, p-values and hypothesis testing in order to come up with some conclusions. All right, well, we're going to go through some other examples in next coming videos, but I hope this helps you out, and good luck, God bless in the rest of your problems.